Hi, welcome to the Frugal Frau. I'm Suki, your host, and today we're going to do the pantry tour as part of the 2024 Pantry Challenge by Three Rivers Homestead. Anyways, I am standing here between a masonry heater, so it's nice and cozy and warm, and a cabinet that we built for primarily dried goods, and this is a good place because it's fairly dry down here. I have a lot of different things in dried goods throughout the house, so this is not the only place where I keep dried goods. We have apples here, nutritional yeast, pumpkin seeds, flaxseed meal. Those two things I did buy, I have to admit, but I bought them a long time ago. But they are part of the pantry now. And then, of course, down here I've got dried potatoes, dried squash. The apples that we dried was from a harvest from 2022, so that was a couple of years ago now. And the apples were on a tree next to the road across the street from us. So we harvested them with permission from the neighbor whose field they were at the edge of. And they were actually quite crummy apples. But you know what? We could use them. We cored them. I took all the cores, and that got made into applesauce, some of which is still in the cupboard across from where I am standing. And the rest we dried. Skins on and everything, and they were mostly pretty small apples like this. So it took us a while. We hand squished the apple cores after they were cooked through a sieve, and we turned that into applesauce. So that turned out really well. There was zero waste, pretty much. I think I had a small handful of waste at the very end, and that was nearly 2 bushels of apples. And those got fed to the chickens and the goats, who were happy to consume it. So moving on, we have another cabinet here. This is where I thought for some reason, I think this was nearly 3 years ago, that I would eat much more fermented food than we eat. So I fermented all this stuff, and we've eaten quite a bit of it. But it's starting to get old now, and I'm just going to rinse most of it off and either give it to the chickens and the goats if they'll eat it, or put some of it in the compost pile. I won't make that mistake again. I need to calculate pretty much how much fermented food we need, and it's probably not the original. I think I did 24 gallons of it. Well, that was a bit much for 2 people. Anyways, we also have maple syrup because we have our own sugar bush. And so this is all maple syrup, which we processed, and I can it. And we do use that up and give quite a bit of away, and we also use it for trade. I have some dried items up here, more of the dent corn we grew, because we do keep it in the corn form until we're ready to use it. We grind it up by hand. It's a big process, but it gets done. And then that is this little narrow cabinet. Okay, over here is just a small cabinet we were able to fit in. And you'll notice that both this cabinet and the cabinet where I had the maple syrup and the ferments are quite narrow. Well, they hide plumbing that we had to run through here. And so my husband said, well, why don't we just build a cabinet around it? And I said, well, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. So he built it. Of course, I painted and decorated it. But in here I keep pickles and relishes. And you'll see I don't have a lot of those because I simply don't eat a lot of pickles and relishes. So, and then I also have tinctures down here that I made because I'm just learning how to do my own medicinal tinctures. So we have elderberries, we have echinacea, and we have mullein, all 3 of which we grow right here on the property. I have extra comfrey here, which can be used in tea and also in salves and stuff, and I've made some of those in the past. So that's all, in the relishes. That's really not a lot, but that's okay, we don't eat it. Okay, continuing on, I did state that I have my dry goods scattered throughout the house because there are no other options for storage at this point. But so more dent corn is here, more beans, And I like to keep the beans in the dry form until I start running out of canned beans. This is because it takes up a lot less space and it will be preserved for a lot longer. So when I get low on canned beans, I will get my pressure canner out and I will can the beans. And I can also make bean soup or put them in other things that I decide to can later on in the season as I get more meat, etc. Now, I only have cabinet space for stuff above this counter, and so this is half of it. So here is where I keep most of my main meals and soups. I have jams and cranberries at the top, and again, most of it's just plain cranberries and cranberry sauce because that's what we use a lot of. We don't use a whole lot of jams, so because of the sugar. So we just keep that minimal. And then I have plenty of dried beans still, so I don't need to worry about canning them for a while. I have plenty of barbecued pork that I made and canned. There's split pea soup here, the last of the applesauce, and there's 3 quarts left. But considering we don't eat a lot of sugar, 3 quarts will last us the rest of this year. So next year we're going to have to harvest apples again because our apple trees are not producing very much. Okay, so the reason why the apple trees aren't producing a whole lot is because they're still fairly young. And in our nearly zone 3 climate, we cannot use the early varieties that produce, such as the dwarfing varieties, because they have weaker root systems and they can't handle the frost depth of the ground around here. So I have to use more mature or what we call standard size trees. So the trade-off is they are stronger trees, but they will take longer to produce. But since there are plenty of apples to be had all along the dirt road we live on, and nobody minds if we harvest them because we've asked many people if we could, we'll just stick with that for now. And over here I just have more of the canned goods. And I have canned potato soup, more beans, the spicy squash soup, which is one of my favorite recipes, and barbecued beans up there. And some tomato products over there. We don't use a whole lot of tomatoes because we just don't like them that much, and we don't want to eat a lot of tomatoes because of the inflammatory properties. So that's it for the canned goods. Now the way I manage this is I go ahead and I put the oldest stuff out on the counter, and that way it forces me to use that first before I start dipping into that. So I've got a few things out here that I need to use up. And then in the corner, I just have all my spare jars. And looking at my spare jar collection, I can tell you, if I had used up every single jar here, that would be piled up still on the counter because there simply isn't enough room in this counter to do it. Now, there's not enough room because we weren't really thinking about the canning and getting storage for that when we moved into this homestead. We needed to get a kitchen, a small kitchen in the basement, because we know in the future that we're going to have to rely totally on this kitchen while we pull apart the main kitchen. All right, so that's a problem. And then we had a heating system that didn't work and we wanted to transfer to a wood system. So we have a large masonry heater, which I'm standing at, which takes up lots of square feet, but is quite efficient. And that's providing the main heat for the house. And so that took up a big space of room. And then we have our wood shop, which you've already seen in a video to my, that would be the east. Here's just a couple of panning shots of the entire downstairs kitchen and pantry area for you to see. This is the lovely cart and cutting board that my wonderful husband made for me to use down here in this kitchen. So the cutting board has only so far been used for the videos I've made, and it's starting to get that real nice used patina. It has casters on the bottom so I can spin it around. It has this little side table, and it's got a little support underneath to hold that up, so if I need to put extra dishes and pans there, I can, although it's not really meant for me to press on it like this part is, but that's fine. And made it in our favorite little antiquing style down here. So that's nice. And of course, all that was hand cut with hand tools. Bless the heart of my husband so much. And, you know, we don't have the best wood to use around here. So we just use whatever we have, whether it warps or not, we use it. And for the upstairs kitchen, we'll probably save and use a little bit better quality wood, and for the cabinets upstairs. But we needed to get this done, and we had to use whatever trees we could get down fairly quickly and get them seasoned fairly quickly too. So you'll notice that these doors, well, right now they're not sitting quite flush, but he can make a little mechanism here to push them back there because, well, the jars get dusty there, and I don't really like dusty jars. Okay, I've turned the cart around because curious minds want to know what's on the other side of the cart. And so you can see it's open here. I have some big bulky things down here. This is a nut sheller, and this is my hand cranked flour mill. And we're still refining how we use this, but that's you know, that's another video. And we have a drawer here which I can keep utensils in and easily pull them out to use when I'm making videos. Or when I actually move down here, I will be probably putting almost all the silverware and every utensil we're going to use when we get down here, because I have only one narrow drawer over in that area, and I have all the canning lids in there, so that's sort of out. And I have the bulky canning pots under the sink and also in another cabinet there. And I left myself 2 empty drawers so I can move just about everything that I will absolutely need when we redo the kitchen. So it's going to be mostly cooking outside at that point, and mostly using up what I have in the canning cupboards in terms of main meals, because it's going to be difficult to cook major meals until we get that kitchen done. But that's okay. I don't mind it, and we plan to do that in this warmer weather so that I can cook outside. And because I don't really want to cook on the wood stove in the summer, but it sure is nice in the winter. So we're going to show you how the mechanism works to hold up that side flap. Okay, further explaining this cart, this leaf, which is very handy to have, has a support that Tom made to hold it. It's very simple. It's just an arm that comes out, sits on a little block of wood, and that just holds it at approximately the same level as the cutting board is at. And he's put this 45-degree angle brace there to make it sturdier. And it's just on a couple of hinges, so it folds back in when not in use. So that's a handy way to make a leaf for a cart like this. Okay, I just wanted to show you the antique red finish we put on here. I paint yellow, blue on this, and then I paint red over it and maybe some green and let it show through, then another coat of red, sand some of it off, and then I go over it with a stain to give it that nice antiqued look. It's a look that we like, plus it covers up a lot of flaws in the wood too. But I really like it. Then we can make up stories about the wood, like it came from, you know, a brothel up in northern Canada, and then it was on a ship, and then it, you know, wherever it went. It could have a long history, but we just make that up as we go along. It's kind of fun that way. Okay, I'm kneeling here in front of the masonry heater where it happens to be nice and cozy warm. This is the opening to it. I'm not touching it because it's hot, and the vents. And we actually had this built by a mason because we didn't know how to build something like this. We can do a lot, but we're not mason experts. And we wanted something that we were going to use as a main source of heat to be properly built and not go through the guesswork and mistakes, since we didn't really know what we were doing with that. So it's really kind of a fun thing. I can put nuts in here and roast them too when the fire's not going full bore and there's coals in there, and I can also put a small kettle in there, or crock pot. Dutch oven was the word I was looking for. but it's a small one because the door is small. We fire this up typically once a day, and if it gets below 0, we fire it up a second time too. But most of the time we can just fire it up once a day, and it radiates quite a bit of heat. So if I go over here, I can sit on the steps and get nice and toasty warm and sit on the steps and read a book. That's really kind of fun. This is the nice understep storage that my husband built for me for even more storage for some of our food. Because in our opinion, you can never have too much storage. So he repeated the, or I should say, I repeated the antique look underneath these steps, which I used on the cart. So just because I like it. So I have this red and green theme going on down here in the basement. So it's Christmas all year round. So inside here, there is a EcoSmart water heater, which seems to actually use quite a bit of electricity and runs a lot, but it's essentially a heat exchanger, and it pulls the heat and moisture out of the air and shoves out very cold, dry air, which is of course great in the summertime. I make sure these doors are well closed in the wintertime because we're sleeping down here and it can get a little bit cold. But I keep sugar and salt over here next to the coldest, driest air just to keep the moisture out of them. I don't use a lot of sugar, and I did purchase it from Azure Standard. I also purchased the salt from Azure Standard. We don't live near salt water, so there's no way we can obtain salt unless we purchase it. So, and remember, in the old days, salt, of course, was a very valuable item. It made the Habsburgs extremely rich. And if you've ever been to Europe, you've been maybe to Salzburg, and they were stationed, they were had their salt mines there, and I've been in a few of those. And the sides of the walls are still salty. I tasted it. But so salt is important because it's important for storing and preserving lots of different food, including meat. So moving on, it becomes a lot more miscellaneous after this. I have my hazelnuts here because I didn't know where else to put them. And I have other items which I've purchased from Azure Standard, including molasses, which I like in my homemade bread rather than maple syrup. And olive oil, which of course olives don't grow here, so I've got to purchase that. And rice vinegar, which I just like to use. Now in the future, I might be able to make a lot more vinegar once the apples get going and we actually plant more apples or harvest more apples. And then I keep other miscellaneous things like hot sauce, which I didn't get around to making this year because my pepper crop was a failure. I'll fix that next year. And things like coconut oil, which I like to use in cooking. And yes, I did buy that from Azure Standard. But again, at least I'm not having to go to the grocery store to buy these things. I buy them in bulk, you know, when I need them. So I tend to buy enough for about a year of each item and then cycle through them. So that's about it for underneath the steps. All right, so it's a mishmash, I admit, but oh well, it is what it is. Gotta store stuff somewhere. Okay, here I am kneeling on the floor in the upstairs hallway. This whole area is a 3-season area. There's 2 rooms, a bathroom, and a hallway, although the bathroom is going to probably become less of a bathroom once we pull the shower out because it tends to want to freeze up all the time. And we have insulated extra, but we still haven't been able to solve that problem. So we just use it as a 3-season area. I have mostly grains stored up here. And yeah, it's a lot of grains. It looks like a lot of grains, and it's really a lot more than 2 people can use. I don't know what I was thinking, but I'm going to gradually use it up, which will take a long time because we don't have a very grain-heavy diet. So I will just be using it to make my homemade bread and a few other things I have besides what I need for bread are whole oats, because we don't have a really good way to process the oats yet. But hopefully in the future we can do that. I have red lentils, which I really like, and I haven't attempted to grow them here, and I'm not sure that I can grow them here, so they might remain on the I will purchase them list, even though it goes against my grain of pretty much I want to be 100% self-sufficient. But if it came to that, there are other things I could substitute for lentils. So I have plenty of beans and they grow well here. So I'm not too worried about that. And I have some rice because I like rice on occasion, but I'll probably wean myself off of all rice eventually. And right now we don't eat a whole lot of it. But so anyway, so a lot of these containers will probably get used for other food and other dried goods as we switch over to more using pea and bean flours if we need them, and also corn, squash, if I can manage to turn squash into flour, and potatoes. But mostly we'll just eat those in their dried form in casseroles and soups. Because again, I don't want to have to rely on a grain diet because it's not the healthiest diet for people. It's not that nutritionally dense. And as you get older, you actually have to think about your protein consumption, and you need to consume less carbs and more protein. So that's another consideration. Now, I've been switching over slowly to gamma lids as I can afford them. And so I still need to get a lot more gamma lids. And I used to have these square buckets with these square lids because square buckets theoretically can stack closer together and you can get more. Well, the only problem with the square buckets is that the lids were so hard to get off that every time I wanted to get a lid off, I had to go get my husband. Tom, can you take the lid off for me? So I decided that those square buckets are going to go in the barn attic and they can get used for something else because that's ridiculous. So, and plus they didn't have the same sealing capabilities as the gamma lids or even these black lids that I have. These are all food safe buckets. So they're a good option for when you want to store 5 gallons of this or that. I put Findus in the room behind this door while I was doing the last segment because he was just wanting to help out too much. Here he is hunting along the stone wall where I have shoveled a path for him through the snow so that he could easily get out there. Okay, I'm standing out here right in front of the root cellar, and I think I've said before that I have carrots, potatoes, and onions currently stored in here. I didn't store the parsnips in here because I was able to still dig them out from under the snow in the bed in which I planted them. However, I must say that I also have parsnips planted in a raised bed. It's a tall raised bed. I can't get them out. The ground is totally frozen, so I won't make that mistake again. But we all make mistakes and we must learn from them. Anyways, the cistern is also in this room. It's going to be our future main source of water once we decide that we are going to get rid of the well pump, which we might do because it's a very poor well pump, which we inherited when we moved into this place. And there's not even a decent pressure tank on it, and it seems to want to run all the time, so it is what it is. But we don't want to have to rely on electricity, like I keep repeating, so we want to rely on water that we can easily obtain right off the roof. We have a stream on the property, but it's up and over a rise and then down in a gully, so it's not very practical for getting water out, and it's not fully running in the summertime, so it's an option if we needed to it. There's a big reservoir and a river a couple miles away, so that could be an option if it was absolutely necessary. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Now, the nice thing about the cistern in here is water, of course, is known as a good heat capacitor, so it really moderates the temperature in here. The whole place is evenly insulated and well insulated. There's dirt up against the west, actually that's the east side. I'm standing on the west side, and it's well insulated on that south side. So it's staying about 40 degrees in here, which is a great temperature for a root cellar. And like I've stated before, it is of course too cold for squash, but if it was warm enough for squash, it would be too warm for the potatoes and the carrots. So I will find another option in the future for squash besides drying and canning, maybe. We'll see. On top of the cistern, my husband plumbed in a hand pump so that we can have hand pumped water, and eventually we might run another second hand pump up through the floor into what's above this is a sitting room that we had put on the house shortly after we moved in. We haven't finished it, of course, but we'll get there. And that way we could have kind of a Hoosier type of a dry sink and pump the water right into that room, and it's right near the wood stove, so we could then take the water and heat it on the wood stove should we need to have water for baths or whatever too. We could actually get a decent quantity of water up there quickly without having to haul it up the steps. So like I said, it keeps, so far it's keeping this room at about 40 degrees, which is really nice. And in the summertime, it's probably about 55 in here. At least that's what it was last summer. Now, if the temperature drops to below 30 for an extended period of time, I expect that this might drop to probably 30, hopefully no colder than that, because I don't really want the potatoes and the carrots to freeze. But that is an unknown at this point. So I'm going to step in here and get some potatoes that I want for later. Here's a panning shot of inside the cistern room and root cellar. Up above the cistern, you can see the pretty little red pump where we can pump water by hand. Okay, behind the wood shed and not too far from the cistern is the pen where we keep the chickens and the goats. This is just their inner corral as opposed to the acre and a half or so that they have to freely roam around in. The chickens, of course, are part of the pantry process as they lay eggs every single day. Here are two goats, Mrs. O'Leary on the left and Bongo on the right. Oh, Mrs. O'Leary is determining whether she wants to be a movie star or not. She's kind of a mess pot. Oh, I guess not. So she runs into the little chicken sauna greenhouse, which is currently covered with snow. But it gives them a nice dry place to scratch around in all winter long. This concludes my pantry tour video. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you will check back often to find new videos from Suki the Frugal Frau. Have a great evening or great day wherever you are.